Ever wake up one morning and feel like the whole world shifted while you were still drinking your coffee? That is exactly what happened today with the British royal family. And I promise you, what you saw on the news is not what actually went down. The headlines are talking about financial transparency and modernizing the monarchy. But beneath all that polite language, something much bigger just happened. Something that changes everything about who holds the real power behind those palace walls. And most people watching from home have no idea what actually went down. So let me paint the picture for you. It is the morning of May 31st, 2026. The time is just past 9 in the morning in London. 50 international news cameras are all set up and waiting outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. The press is expecting the usual kind of announcement. Maybe King Charles will say something about charitable work. Maybe there will be some nice photos. But what happens next catches everyone off guard. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, steps out of her car completely alone. There is no King Charles next to her, no Prince William by her side, no assistants hovering nearby, just Catherine walking up to the microphones by herself. And she starts delivering a statement that sounds nice enough on the surface. She talks about financial transparency and making sure the crown represents honesty. It all sounds very reasonable and progressive. But here is where it gets interesting. If you actually pay attention to the words she chose, you realize this is not just a nice announcement. This is something much more serious. Her exact words were that the crown only holds value when it represents absolute transparency. She said that starting at midnight tonight, the entire royal charitable system will undergo a full independent forensic audit. Any undocumented funds will be immediately frozen. And then she said something that really stands out. She said they do not protect mistakes in the dark. They bring them into the light. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a nice statement about honesty. But if you know how the royal family works, you understand that these words were chosen very carefully. They were not just pretty language. They were a direct message aimed at one specific person. The way most news outlets reported this was very surface level. They called it financial modernization. They said it was a progressive step forward. They used all the nice, polite words that make everyone feel comfortable. But what actually happened the moment Catherine said those words was something much more dramatic. She formally initiated a protocol that legally freezes all discretionary spending within the royal household. That means all the money that is not strictly tracked and accounted for suddenly becomes frozen. No one can touch it. And here is the key detail that most people missed. That spending freeze was not random at all. It was specifically designed to hit the financial infrastructure that Queen Camilla has been quietly operating through for years. The phrase about not protecting mistakes in the dark was not just poetic language. It was a direct message aimed directly at Camilla. And everyone inside the palace knew exactly what it meant. Now, here is the part that makes the whole thing even more interesting. Catherine did this all alone. No king standing beside her to give his approval. No heir to the throne lending his authority to the moment. She stood there by herself, and that was entirely deliberate. By showing up without Charles or William, she was not speaking as a supporting family member. She was projecting independent authority. She was signaling to everyone inside the palace, and everyone watching at home, that she is not waiting for permission from anyone. She made that announcement on her own terms, at her own timing, and with her own authority. And that sent a very clear message about where the real power is now starting to shift. But while all of this was happening publicly in London, something very different was playing out about 70 miles away in Wiltshire. Queen Camilla was at the Raymel estate, and by 11 o'clock that same morning, the property was in what sources are describing as a complete lockdown. No staff movement in or out, no communications going through normal channels. Everything was shut down tight. And then at some point after Catherine's statement went live, a single vehicle pulled up to the driveway. Inside that vehicle was a senior legal advisor representing Prince William. And that advisor was carrying a secured folder containing what palace insiders are calling the silent contract. Now, I want you to understand how serious this document was. This was not a polite letter asking Camilla to consider scaling back her responsibilities. This was a binding legal agreement with zero room for negotiation, and the terms were genuinely extreme. By signing it, Camilla would forfeit her right to speak in any official capacity without prior approval. Every single public statement she makes from that point forward, every piece of correspondence, every engagement, every interaction with the press, all of it would have to go through Catherine's communications team first. The personal network she spent 30 years building, the media relationships, the charitable patronage structures, the strategic alliances, all of it dismantled the moment she put her name on those pages. And you might be sitting there thinking, why would she ever sign something like that? She is the queen consort. She outranks Catherine in the current hierarchy. What leverage could William possibly have that would make a sitting queen agree to those terms? The answer is a number: $12,450,000. That is the amount of money that forensic accountants uncovered when they started going through the royal ledgers. What they found was a financial operation that had been running quietly for years inside the charitable arm of the Duchy of Cornwall. The mechanics of it were actually quite sophisticated. Small administrative grants would get approved for what looked like standard operational costs, completely routine on paper. But instead of reaching their intended public recipients, those specific funds were being redirected into a secondary intermediary trust. From that holding account, the money was then dispersed across a network of unlisted charities and independent organizations, all of which were exclusively tied to Camilla's private patronage circle. So basically, what was happening is that institutional money was being funneled into a closed loop that financed her private networking, her public relations alliances, and the expansion of her personal sphere of influence. All of it hidden from standard palace oversight. When the paper trail was finally decoded, the documentation was apparently airtight. Every transaction, every routing number, every organization that received money, it was all documented and ready to be exposed. And that documentation is what William had sitting in a folder when his legal advisor walked into Raymel. That morning, the choice Camilla was presented with was not subtle at all. Sign the contract and keep the title while losing all actual power. Or refuse to sign and watch the audit get escalated to external regulatory authorities. Under the UK Charities Act of 2011, deliberately misdirecting charitable trust funds is a serious criminal offense, not just a reputational problem. If she refused, the full financial records would have been handed over to investigators and then unsealed for the global press. Every routing number, every transaction history, every organization that received redirected money. The resulting public inquiry would have been catastrophic, and the palace would have been institutionally obligated to distance itself entirely, leaving her with no protection from the legal consequences. There was also a specific timing element that made this even more urgent. At 1:45 that same afternoon, the Privy Council was scheduled to convene for a mandatory session. They were meeting to officially approve and seal the royal household's budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Once that budget gets signed off and becomes a permanent state record, the entire dynamic changes. William had allowed that meeting to proceed with the $12 million discrepancy still unresolved. The monarchy would not just be dealing with an internal problem anymore. By approving a compromised financial ledger, the institution itself would become legally entangled in the cover up. So the window was extremely narrow. The confrontation at Raymel had to happen that morning before 1:45, before that meeting, before the ledger was sealed. And that is exactly what William executed. The legal advisor placed the documents on the table, turned around, and walked out without waiting for a response. Camilla was left sitting alone in the quiet of that rural estate with just a few hours to make the most consequential decision of her life. And based on what came out of the royal press office later that afternoon, it is pretty clear which direction she went. At 3:30 that same day, a bulletin was released. It was short, unusually short for an official royal statement. Just 4 lines. And the key sentence read that due to sudden and unforeseen health complications, requiring an extended period of rest, the Queen Consort will be stepping back from all official public duties for the foreseeable future. Now, if you follow royal media at all, you know exactly what that language means. Sudden health complications is the most airtight phrase in the royal communications playbook. The press cannot aggressively push back on a medical announcement without looking like they are attacking a sick woman. The public does not demand specific timelines when someone is unwell. There is no accountability built into that framing, and there is no opening for follow up questions. It is a door that closes completely the moment it is used. And whoever wrote that statement knew precisely what they were doing because it was not written by Camilla's team. Her team no longer has that authority. But here is the question that I think is actually worth sitting with for a moment. If the financial evidence was as definitive as sources are describing, why not remove her title entirely? Why allow her to remain queen consort even in a ceremonial capacity? Why protect the label while gutting everything behind it? The answer comes back to King Charles. And honestly, it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Full public removal of the queen consort's title, especially one triggered by a financial scandal involving charitable funds tied directly to his household, would be an absolutely devastating blow to his reign. Not just politically, but personally. The global image of a sitting monarch whose own wife was caught redirecting millions from his charitable trusts is not something you can manage through careful press releases. It is the kind of story that permanently defines a reign in the worst possible way. So, by allowing Camilla to keep the title on paper while stripping every piece of actual operational power from behind it, the institution protects Charles from that outcome. The public sees a supportive king navigating a private family health matter with quiet dignity. They do not see the full picture. And that gap between the public perception and the actual reality is entirely intentional. What Camilla's daily life looks like now is genuinely remarkable to think about. She still has the title. She will still appear at state dinners. She will still wear the jewelry and smile for cameras and wave from cars. But every word she says publicly will have been pre-approved by Catherine's communications office. Every engagement she attends will have been selected by William's team. Every visitor to her residence requires advanced clearance. Her private communications are now routed through internal servers with oversight from Catherine's team. Every call logged. Every movement accounted for. She exists inside what one source apparently described as a highly monitored glass cage. The visual presentation of power is maintained, but the actual mechanics of it have been completely extracted. 3 decades of carefully constructed influence compressed into a ceremonial image that someone else is now managing on her behalf. I honestly cannot think of a more complete reversal of position. And while all of this was being finalized, there was one absence throughout the entire day that I think tells you more about the current state of the royal household than almost anything else. King Charles was nowhere. He did not issue a statement defending Camilla. He did not intervene to stop the legal ultimatum that was delivered to Raymond. He did not appear publicly. He did not acknowledge any part of what was happening. For a man who wears the crown, that silence was deafening. Internal sources are saying he was fully aware of the contents of the financial audit before any of this went public. He knew what was in that folder. And he also understood that if he used his sovereign authority to protect Camilla from the consequences, William was prepared to let the financial discrepancies become a public matter. So Charles was effectively trapped. Protecting his wife meant triggering a scandal that could permanently damage his reign and the institution's credibility. Staying silent meant watching the woman closest to him get stripped of her autonomy without a single word of defense. He chose the institution. He chose the crown over the person. And he spent the day quietly in his private quarters while his son and daughter-in-law systematically dismantled everything she had built. That is not a small thing. That is a king who does not hold the actual leverage within his own household anymore. And I think everyone inside those palace walls understands exactly what that means for how the next several years are going to look. Around 5 o'clock that evening, as the sun was going down over London, there was one final detail that people paying close attention picked up on. The personal standard of the Princess of Wales was raised on the roof of Kensington Palace. Most people walking through the area probably did not think twice about it, but within royal protocol, that is not a casual gesture. Standards communicate presence and authority. Raising it at the close of that specific day was a deliberate punctuation mark on everything that had just happened. Catherine has been a member of this family for 15 years. She came in as an outsider, absorbed an enormous amount of scrutiny and internal tension, never broke publicly, never gave the press a crisis to run with, and spent that entire time watching how the institution actually operates beneath its polished surface, learning where the real leverage sits, learning which mechanisms matter and which ones are just theater. Today was the result of all of that. Not a dramatic confrontation or a messy public blow-up, but a clean, invisible, completely deniable transfer of operational control that the general public will probably never fully understand. The official story is that the monarchy is stable, united, and graciously managing a private health situation within the family. And that story holds up perfectly because there is nothing visible to contradict it. No fingerprints, no public argument. No constitutional crisis, just a flag on a rooftop and a press statement about someone needing rest. But then, just as it looked like everything had been neatly resolved, investigators reviewing the final pages of the audit documentation found something that changes the entire picture. Buried in the last section of the Box 11A dossier, there was an anomaly that the palace's internal team apparently did not catch before locking down Camilla's access. Or if they did catch it, they were not fast enough to stop it. Because in the minutes just before William's security team shut down the internal servers and severed her network access completely, a final encrypted wire transfer was authorized and executed. A significant portion of those undocumented funds did not get frozen the way Catherine's announcement was supposed to ensure. It moved. And it did not move to a British bank account or a local organization or anywhere that falls under the jurisdiction of the people who spent all day engineering this takeover. The routing data pointed to a private offshore holding entity registered in Montecito, California. And if that geographic detail means nothing to you, let me just say the name out loud. Montecito. The exact location where Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have been living since they stepped back from royal duties and relocated to the United States. The receiving account, according to the server logs pulled from those final minutes of Camilla's access window, is nested under a financial umbrella linked to the Sussex Trust. Now, I want to be careful here because this is where the story moves from confirmed events into territory that raises a lot of questions without clean answers yet. What the data shows is a transfer. What it does not automatically tell you is the full nature of the relationship behind it. But the implications are significant enough that I think they are worth unpacking carefully. Because if this connection is what it appears to be, it fundamentally reframes years of public narrative about the divisions inside this family. Think about what the mainstream story has been for the past several years. Harry and Meghan on one side, having left the institution, written the memoir, done the interviews, publicly described a family environment that was cold and dismissive and occasionally hostile. Camilla specifically came up in those accounts in ways that were not flattering. The public understanding was that these were genuinely opposing factions, opposing values, opposing interests, and no meaningful contact behind the scenes. But what the Box 11A data is now suggesting is that while the public feud was playing out in interviews and headlines, there may have been a quiet financial arrangement running in the background that both sides found mutually useful. Camilla needed an exit route for capital that could not stay inside the UK without being traced. The Sussex Trust is registered outside British legal jurisdiction, which means William and Catherine have no oversight authority over it whatsoever. It is, from a purely structural standpoint, the perfect destination for funds you do not want frozen by a palace-initiated forensic audit. And that is the part that makes this so uncomfortable for the new power structure that William and Catherine spent all of May 31st building. They executed a clean sweep domestically. Camilla signed the contract. The Privy Council session went ahead with a corrected ledger. The press got a health announcement. From the outside, the entire operation looked sealed and complete, but $12 million does not just disappear. It went somewhere. And the somewhere it went is the one place they cannot reach. Whoever is holding those financial records right now, whoever has the receipts and the routing numbers and the documentation of where that money moved and why, is sitting in a private estate in Southern California, watching this entire situation unfold from a comfortable distance outside UK jurisdiction, outside palace authority, outside the reach of anything William and Catherine built over the course of that single carefully orchestrated day. That is not a minor loose end. That is the entire leverage of the situation, having quietly relocated across the Atlantic before the door could be closed. And here is what I keep coming back to when I think about this. The genius of what Catherine and William did on May 31st was the invisibility of it. No public scandal, no constitutional drama, no fingerprints on the record. The whole operation worked because it was contained, quiet, and completely deniable. But that invisibility only holds as long as the evidence stays inside the building. The moment those records exist outside the institution, outside British legal reach, in the hands of people who have already demonstrated a willingness to speak publicly about their experiences with this family, the calculus changes completely. Catherine can manage Camilla's public appearances. She can approve every statement and control every engagement and maintain the carefully curated image of a queen consort on medical leave who poses no threat to anyone. But she cannot manage what Harry and Meghan choose to do with financial documentation that connects the Sussex Trust to $12 million that was supposed to be frozen by a palace audit. That is a story that, if it ever surfaces publicly, does not just embarrass Camilla. It raises questions about the audit itself, about what William knew and when, about whether the financial cleanup was genuinely about institutional integrity or about something more strategic. It opens every door that today's operation was designed to permanently close. So, what we actually witnessed on May 31st was not a clean resolution. It was a first move in something considerably more complicated. The domestic power shift is real. Catherine's authority inside the palace is real. The flag on the roof of Kensington at sunset was a genuine signal of where the institution is heading. But the most consequential piece of this entire story is currently sitting offshore outside anyone's control in the hands of people who have every reason and probably every ability to use it. The British royal family believes it closed the loop today. What they may not fully appreciate yet is that the loop has an opening they did not seal in time. And somewhere in Montecito, someone knows exactly where that opening is.